Okay, for those of you that are new to this channel, I'm reading my book, True Perspective, Why Leading with Truth Always Wins. And I've read a couple of chapters so far. After I read the prologue, the introduction, and we are up to the first chapter. So, the book's split into three parts. And the first part is understanding. Second part is demonstrating, and the third part is shaping. Sorry, I've got a bit of hay fever going on. Part one, understanding. There's a quote that nicely summarizes my thoughts on understanding. And this quote is from Isaac Asimov. He says, "It is the obvious which is so difficult to see, most of the time. People say it's as plain as the nose on your face, but how much of the nose on your face can you see unless someone holds up a mirror to you?" Okay, Chapter 1. What is true perspective? As human beings, we fear conflict, and our brains have evolved to react to perceived threats in specific ways, such as to fight, freeze, or flee. Of course, there are many modes of response, but the above three are what most people agree on. When it comes to conflict, the majority of people choose not to fight, but to either freeze with fear or flee the situation altogether. Due to this, we've become experts at pussyfooting around issues, avoiding conflict, and overall keeping the peace. While this feels good in the moment, it ultimately delays the inevitable, addressing the elephant in the room. In behavioral economics, this is a form of cognitive bias known as system justification, maintaining the status quo because that is perceived as easier than the alternative. This common truth that people generally don't like to have difficult conversations illustrates one of the biggest paradoxes I've regularly stumbled over regarding human behaviour. That is, we are all seeking to be the best version of ourselves, asking for feedback in order to increase our performance. Yet when asked to provide our perspective on others, we retreat back to safety in order to preserve our relationships. Equally, when presented with the truth about yourself, you might find yourself saying, "That's just their opinion," or "I'm not really like that, am I?" Or, "If that's how they see me, that's their problem, not mine." In the short term, avoiding having honest conversations will enable you to fly under the radar and stay out of trouble, but you'll eventually grow frustrated and let things boil over. Look no further than your own family for evidence to support this. I'm yet to meet a family that is free of conflict, and every family can produce tales of relationship breakdowns to such an extent that they don't want to associate with one another. Extreme examples include people refusing to attend funerals of parents, as is the case of my own father not attending his mother's funeral, parents disowning their children, and siblings denying their connection with one another. Again, my own father and his brother Bruce. All of this is wasted energy and conflict resulting from not being honest with one another and not being courageous enough to take the time to understand each other's perspectives. When people are in leadership positions, be it a frontline manager, senior executive, or CEO, honest conversations start to dwindle. Sometimes this is a reflection of the leader's inability to remain open and curious to feedback. In other cases, this is more about the giver of the feedback and their inability to deliver a message anchored in truth. Regardless, when honest conversations aren't happening, it's a failing in leadership, an inability to see oneself from another's perspective, and the fastest way to experience an erosion of culture. Maybe the most eloquent description of true perspective comes from the literary genius Isaac Asimov in his quote, "People say it's as plain as the nose on your face, but how much of the nose on your face can you see unless someone holds up a mirror to you? Early in my career, I was working with a talented CEO to help increase the effectiveness of their organization. After measuring the organization's engagement and debriefing the executive team on the health of the organization, we agreed that rolling out team workshops with all employees was the best next step. During the process, it became obvious that leaders in their teams were not skilled at or even ready to have honest conversations with each other. It wasn't a matter of awareness. They were aware of the challenges that they were facing them on key projects. They just weren't able to work through the discomfort of calling each other out on their dysfunctional behaviours. It was easier to point fingers, blame others, and not take responsibility for what wasn't working. During one of our coaching sessions, the CEO confessed that the executive team were amongst the worst offenders when it came to telling each other what they wanted to hear rather than what they needed to hear. Moreover, the CEO was sure that each of the executives rarely presented the truth or raised difficult matters. What the CEO desired most was to have some honest conversations and to enable the team to share what they needed to share so the CEO had some true perspective. I'd love to claim ownership of the concept of true perspective, but it's not new, nor is it innovative. For as long as people exist, the need for honest conversations will taunt us. The fear evoked by needing to share something important with someone in your life, be it a boss, life partner, parent, sibling, or friend, can be likened to a seasoned performer preparing to approach the stage. Regardless of how many times you do it, there will always be that knot in your stomach, the tension that rises, and the dread that precedes a powerful performance. In life, we need to learn how to show up in these moments when we are required to push through the discomfort and do what most people won't. Have the honest conversation and lead with the truth. Here's a quote that has been inserted that I was actually introduced to me by one of my bosses at Gallup. And that quote says, and it's often incorrectly attributed to Einstein, but that quote says, "Not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted." William Bruce Cameron. I became a psychologist because I had a deep fascination with understanding people and using this understanding to influence how they behave. However, when I first started working as an organizational psychologist, I quickly found out that instead of people, I was in a world of spreadsheets and data collection. I found this draining and monotonous. Within my first few weeks, I had compiled numerous presentations describing the engagement and culture of organizations, but the work I was doing didn't feel real. I couldn't help but notice that the data looked similar from one organization to the next, and that the recommendations that went with it were generic. Of course, there were differences in the data, but to what extent those differences were expressed in real behavioral terms was, at that stage, unknown to me. After a few months, an opportunity rose to conduct some qualitative focus groups. In preparing for the brief, I reviewed the quantitative results and noted the engagement levels were low, in the bottom 10% of the global database. The CEO had rejected this quantitative data and instead demanded that we speak to the front line to determine the truth, which, in his mind, was that the engagement levels were some of the highest in the world. Interestingly, the CEO had reason to question the data, because the business case for measuring engagement using Gallup's Q12 was grounded in research linking engagement to business outcomes. The business was, from a numbers perspective, incredibly successful. They had a monopoly on the market and the money kept rolling in, so the CEO concluded that employee engagement must be good. I was excited to test my belief and skepticism that the data may not be real and that I'd embarked on a career that was some sort of scam. I started to consider the possibility that my years spent studying organizational psychology were now being used as a symbol of credibility to help my company trick clients into spending money with them. The client was a manufacturing and engineering organisation with a 98% male workforce and 0 women in leadership positions. I was informed that within the first group I presented to, of around 60 people, at least 2 were female. These women were so well disguised, most likely out of self-preservation, that it took me until the end of the session to identify them. So there I was, in a room full of blokes who, according to the data, were some of the most disengaged people on the planet, but who also somehow produced record profit levels. The reality was, the CEO was wrong. What I experienced from the group was deep-seated anger, bitterness, resentment, and learned helplessness. This was not a one-off occurrence for the company. Everywhere we went, management failed to acknowledge the truth about the company's low engagement levels. Many of the employees were lifers. They'd never worked anywhere else, so they were victims of their own loyalty, unaware that the environment they were choosing to invest their working life in was toxic, damaging, and amongst the worst in the world culturally. For one presentation, the culture was so bad that my co-facilitator and I were subjected to deliberate attempts to sabotage the session. We'd been relegated to deliver the session in a demountable behind the main building, despite the main building having beautiful training facilities. The light had been removed, there was no air conditioning, and we were provided only with an archaic overhead projector. I couldn't help but feel compassion for the staff members who had taken part in the deliberate act of sabotaging their own opportunity to be honest and share what was really going on for them. Interestingly, when the session finished, we offered to hang around and have a chat with anyone who wanted to talk. A couple of people took us up on this offer, including the HR business partner who had been tasked with organising the room and providing us with what we needed. Without any prompting, she burst into tears and unleashed a tirade of what can only be described as a culture that was rotten to the core. Her tears were filled with shame of somebody who knows they've been corrupted by the environment, has become someone they don't like, and is suffering each day while living a lie. She was an example of how not to lead with the truth and how that creates misery. After another session, I was approached by a young man in his early 20s who was a forklift driver. He was heavy-hearted and carried a weight on his shoulder that looked like depression. He shared that when he first started working, he was in love with his job. He described the joy of being a forklift driver and experiencing the reward that the machine he operated offered him. Things were great for the first few months until he started copping shit from his colleagues. They all seemed to think that he was too happy to be normal, and they assumed that he was getting special treatment. As the bullying escalated, he started to withdraw from life and attempt to blend in by moping around at work and not smiling. It's well known that the best way to change your state of mind is to change how you hold your body. This young man no longer wanted to come to work. He experienced anxiety while getting ready for work and no longer found pleasure in most areas of life, at work, at home, and even with his family. He had changed his standard mood by modifying his body language to fit into a bad culture. The toxic culture had infiltrated every aspect of this young man, as if he'd been drinking water from a slightly poisonous well until his body started to shut down. Having heard these stories firsthand, I felt a stronger sense of responsibility to ensure that the CEO and his leadership team took action. I personally promised every group that I would make sure they would be heard and that I would make positive changes. That was my first big lesson as a consultant. We were denied the opportunity to present the results and instead told to send a PowerPoint presentation over to them. What's worse, when presented with the truth, the CEO was adamant that we had made an error and that our research methodology must have been wrong. I was furious, ropeable, annoyed, and ultimately powerless to do anything. There are a few important lessons from that first gig that I carry with me wherever I go. The data is real, but represents a generalized view of what's going on, and then overlooks the important factors that reflect the truth. Speaking to people and eyeballing the organization is essential in determining the truth, but needs to be complemented by some far-reaching quantitative data. What the CEO and executive team choose to accept and believe determines the reality of the organization. If they believe they are engaged, no data, however compelling, will convince them otherwise. There must be a level of openness and receptivity in order to create change. Ultimately, qualitative data represents the truth, and quantitative data represents how generalizable that truth really is. The real power comes from interpreting them together. 6 months later, I was reading the Financial Review and saw an article describing the suicide of a young man in this same organization due to severe bullying. My heart sank as I recalled the young man who had shared his story with me. I couldn't be certain, but deep down, I knew it was him. I considered if I had done enough to challenge the CEO to share the truth and ensure that the pain their employees were feeling was addressed. And yet, how could I have done more when there was no appetite for change amongst the leadership? From this outcome emerged a powerful sense of purpose in the work that I do and the people I help. My purpose is to uncover the truth, and regardless of how hard it might be, to have the tough conversation, to show courage by leading with the truth. If you talk about people initiatives being fluffy or brand them as discretionary spend, I challenge you to consider that people initiatives are real, lives are at risk, and you have the ability to help save them. If you define success in business as the revenue generation, cost-cutting, and year-on-year double-digit growth, then you're missing a trick. The people stuff matters. Just because your profit and loss statement looks good, it doesn't mean you're doing well as a company. You must consider how you are supporting the well-being of yourself, your team, and the broader organization. At this point, I'd like to make sure we're on the same page. True perspective is not a fancy way of framing self-awareness. While it does involve having a good grasp of self-concept, it's more about aligning the concept we have of ourselves with the concept others have of us. True perspective encapsulates the interaction between self and other. And as such, you need to see yourself as part of a system, be that a team, family, community, organization, or culture. What you see and experience in the world are reflections captured in moments of time, shaped by what you expect and believe will happen. I'm going to read that again because it's an incredibly important point. What you see and experience in the world are reflections captured in moments of time, shaped by what you expect and believe will happen. True perspective is the art of seeing yourself through the rest of the world's eyes. This image represents true perspective. Ironically, when you see yourself externally, it changes who you are internally. It allows you to continue to grow and expand as a person. Having true perspective will enable you to continuously evaluate what you are contributing to the world by seeing what is reflected back at you. True perspective is also an equilibrium, constantly balancing how you see yourself with how you are seen and experienced. A good example of this comes from one of my clients, a highly people-oriented leader who often struggles with speaking up or voicing her concerns at board meetings. What holds her back is a fear that she will be perceived as pushy or annoying, which is completely the opposite of what she is trying to achieve as a leader. But her fear of being perceived as pushy is just a hypothesis that needs to be tested. Conversely, her colleagues told me that she is quite reserved and seems to hold her cards close to her chest. They wanted to see her sharing her opinion and her honest perspective more. When she received this feedback, it enabled her to evaluate how aligned her self-concept was with how others were seeing and experiencing her. It gave her the ability to allow herself to experiment with being more authentic, to have a go at showing up differently, and know that people are expecting as much from her. This example shows that when balance is achieved, your self-concept is aligned with how others are seeing and experiencing you. At its core, true perspective is about performance enhancement through experience enhancement. If you enhance your own experience, the experience of others will be enhanced, as will be your performance. It's what good coaches in all areas of life are masters of. If you want to be the best at something, the first step is understanding your current capability. The second step is verifying that your assessment is aligned with how others experience you. Only when you have true perspective are you in a position to have an honest conversation with yourself about what you need to do to improve. I like to think of true perspective as one of those mirrors that enables you to see yourself from every angle. A similar experience can be had in the changing room at any department stores. Of course, this is not always a pleasant experience. Seeing yourself how others see and experience you can be confronting and painful, or sometimes liberating and rewarding. True perspective requires you to choose how you respond to the perspective you have been given. Growing up, I was an active kid, but built like a toothpick. I was a fast runner and coordinated enough to pick up most sports pretty quickly, so I was always engaged in some sort of physical activity. Yet, by the time I was at university, I had created a well and truly sedentary lifestyle for myself. I spent most of my time on a computer, reading, talking, or studying. I'd stopped putting physical activity at the top of my to-do list as I matured. Funnily enough, my self-concept was still aligned with that active young self. By the time I was 24, my weight had climbed to 95 kilograms, about a 25% increase in my body weight. And it wasn't because I'd added a whole bunch of muscle. To be honest, I knew that I'd not been eating consciously, and my wife had mentioned that I should do some exercise to ensure I stay healthy. I agreed in principle, but took no action. My identity and how I saw myself had not yet corrected, so why would my behaviour change? I was given some true perspective when my mate invited me to go for a run along the beach. It took 100 metres for the novelty to wear off. I was completely out of breath and couldn't help but notice that my man boobs seemed a whole lot less manageable than normal. By the time we got to the beach, I'd almost passed out with fatigue. I felt sick to my stomach and realised I had a problem. Health issues aside, the underlying problem that I'd unveiled was my lack of awareness about how others were experiencing me. Of course, this wasn't the only aspect of who I was that suffered from my lack of awareness, and it certainly wasn't the last. I share this story because most of us can relate to the innocuous experience of gaining weight slowly and steadily so we don't notice the change. It's the outcome of sticking one's head in the sand and denying the responsibility of choice. Some would argue that I chose to be fat. I disagree. I avoided making a choice altogether, so my brain cleverly decided it wasn't important until my body told me that it was. This is how most mental and physical illnesses manifest. we avoid the truth until we can't avoid it anymore. The truth hurts, moving out of blissful ignorance. It's a new paragraph. Truth is something that philosophers and psychologists have been debating for millennia, and will most likely still be debating it for millennia to come. I too have been seduced by the concept of truth for my whole life, particularly the paradox of it. By this, I mean how being honest or truthful often translates into the end of a relationship, conflict at work, an identity crisis, or the uncovering of something you wish you could unlearn. If being honest or truthful carries with it the foundation of integrity, why does it lead to so much challenge? The answer, I believe, lies in perspective. Self-awareness is characterized as one's ability to align one's actions with one's internal values or standards. Someone who is highly self-aware will be able to objectively evaluate themselves and correctly understand how they are perceived by others. In many cases, a large gap exists between one's perceived capability compared with the perception held by an external third party. In some cases, this is represented by an overestimation of ability, and in other cases, an underestimation. We tend to overestimate our ability in a variety of areas of expertise. This is due to a cognitive bias explained by the Dunning-Kruger effect. This is the tendency to overestimate our ability, particularly when our ability is low. This can show up in all areas of our lives, such as in our driving, intelligence, athleticism, and attractiveness. Our ability to see ourselves in truth, our actual ability, capability, intelligence, athleticism, or awareness, is masked by our cognitive biases. While having an accurate sense of your ability to sing or play tennis on the weekend comes with very little consequence for our success in life, there are other areas where the impact on results come at a far greater cost. Self-awareness is a critical ability for any leader to master. Moreover, self-awareness is arguably one of the most important skills for anyone to master, regardless of their leadership level. In my work as an organizational psychologist, there are 3 questions I've spent much time trying to answer. 1. What makes some people more self-aware than others? 2. Is it possible for anyone to enhance their self-awareness or become more self-aware? And 3. Does increasing a person's self-awareness translate to positive results in a business context? To answer the first 2 questions comes down to a person's ability to acquire, accept, and actualize feedback. While there are differences in self-awareness based on IQ and personality factors, the differences are not meaningful. Through experience, we gain or lose confidence. This tends to affect our level of self-awareness. If we tend to show up with an inflated sense of confidence, our ability won't correlate, i.e., blissful ignorance. Conversely, if we have a wealth of experience, our confidence will likely be high and correlate significantly with our actual ability. Let's call this consciously masterful. Here's a diagram representing what I'm talking about. So, blissful ignorance, low awareness, high confidence, high awareness, low confidence is brutally critical. Where we want to be is consciously masterful. High awareness, high confidence. The process of maintaining or developing a supreme level of self-awareness requires the same 3 components. To acquire feedback from those you deal with, to accept the feedback as a valid perspective worth consideration, and 3, to put into action or actualize the feedback you have received. This three-part formula appears intuitive and simple, but don't be deceived. Each component requires large doses of curiosity, humility, and courage. We all like to think we are better than we are, and, to be honest, it's an ego-affirming state of mind. I've often had challenging conversations with leaders, followed by them stating, "Thanks for letting me know, but I think I preferred being blissfully ignorant," or, worse, "Thanks for confirming what I already knew." I too have faced the dilemmas of gaining self-awareness only to create a desire to turn back the clock and revert to blissful ignorance. Blissful ignorance is appealing because it takes no effort. It feeds on our laziness and reinforces the idea that we don't need to do anything. Equally, conscious mastery can only be achieved through a relentlessly iterative process of learning lessons learned, application of knowledge, experimentation, and above all, hard work. Given the choice, most people would opt for the chronic but bearable ache that comes with never achieving one's potential, rather than acutely painful experiences that equate to personal growth. What's more interesting is, if asked what's more important, most people will acknowledge that personal growth rates higher on the life fulfillment scale than coasting through life without significant challenge. On this last point, we can begin to answer the third question. Does increasing self-awareness translate to positive results in a business context? My answer is no, not by itself. I have numerous examples of people whom I've coached who have increased their self-awareness remarkably over a relatively short period. Despite their newfound insight, they harbored no strong desire to accept nor actualize the feedback they had received. When this occurs, sadly, but not surprisingly, their performance in a business context usually decreases. Consider the concept of employee surveys carried out by human resources to provide a snapshot of how people are feeling. If the organization seeks feedback, acquires, but does not accept or actualize the results, the responses from employees is usually akin to, "Why did I bother wasting my time doing that survey if they aren't going to do anything?" Similarly, if a leader seeking to improve does nothing with the feedback they are given, those involved in providing them with perspective will begin to wonder why they bothered, or if the leader even wanted to improve in the first place. It takes more than just asking for feedback to improve. You need to do something with the perspective you are given. What then is truth? Truth is found through the process of acquiring, accepting, and actualizing the perspective that others provide to you. This true perspective you receive is only half the battle. It's what you do with that perspective that leads to results. This same truth applies to improvement in every aspect of who we are and what we do. Whether it be a karate grading, writing a book, submitting a tender for a large piece of work, a final exam, an audition for a lead role, a job interview, or even receiving treatment for a life-threatening disease. These tests all carry the same truth. They are all hard work. They all require you to step outside of yourself and truly see yourself as you are. Growing, expanding, and achieving results first requires you to see yourself the way the rest of the world sees you. Only from this true perspective are you able to lead with the truth and experience what it really means to win. Yeah. Big chapter. Oops, I'm just messing things up on my desk. I enjoyed reading that chapter. I found a few things coming up. Interestingly, right now, one of my sons is in Japan in Tokyo training for the World Championships that are coming up. And we've been having a lot of conversations. And if he watches this, he'll smirk. But we've been having a lot of conversations about choice and those moments where you feel like it's all too hard and you want to give up. And it is hard. He's training with some really elite fighters, and he's getting bashed up on a daily basis, and you just wonder, why are you subjecting yourself to that? And there's a truth that sits beneath that question, and that truth we keep coming back to in our conversations over Line, which is a communication app. It's regardless of what you're facing, regardless of what suffering you put yourself in or you recognize yourself in, it all stems from choices, as does the response that you're choosing to show up with. So, yeah, true perspective is that recognition of where you're at and how you're being experienced by others, and knowing that the only way to influence how others are experiencing you is to shift your own experience through choice. And there's a whole lot of complexity around that. And it like I said to my son recently, he's like, yeah, makes sense. I guess it sounds easy. I'm like, well, actually, no. It's simple, but it's not easy. And that's why most people who are seeking self-growth, and they read every bloody self-help book out there to get the answer, the easy answer, the elixir, the silver bullet, the panacea, whatever it might be, struggle. Because there is no easy way. There is no easy answer. There's no one option. It's all challenging. That's the truth. And no one likes that answer. No one wants to live with the fact that the suffering they feel is exactly what they need right now. They need to choose the suffering. The resistance they feel to that is exactly the direction they need to go. I hate it, personally. I know this. I have this insight. We all do. And I hate it. I acknowledge it. And I'm sorry for reminding you of that. However, the truth is, that which sucks for you right now, that which hurts the most right now, is exactly what you need to be experiencing. What changes for you and what influences you being experienced as a sad sack of shit or somebody who's inspiring is how you choose to respond. True perspective. That is that process. In that moment, when somebody is experiencing you as a sad sack of shit or a terrible manager or somebody who needs some perspective, it is very difficult to step up to the plate and hit a home run by providing that person with feedback that lands. Reason being is we all try and share what we think they need to hear, rather than share what we want to share, which is get out of your own way and get on with it. Stop being a sad sack of shit and playing victim. It's a harsh message, and one that we all need to remind ourselves of on a regular basis. Anything other than that is, in my humble and obviously biased opinion, lying to yourself. We are all guilty of it. I'm guilty of it, have done it for many years, and am doing it right now. True perspective enables us to see the lies that we've been telling ourselves and move beyond them. Having people in your world provide you with that opportunity to acquire that feedback and then action it to make positive change, it's the greatest gift you can ever get. We all want growth. Right? Once we've got a job, we satisfy the basic need. Let's go back to Maslow. We feed ourselves, we put a roof over our head, we're warm, we're comfortable. We can then build relationships. Once we get past that point though, what is there? We want growth, we want development, and we seek that through tangible things such as promotions, such as more money, which is all valid. But actually deep down, the core of it is, are you growing as a person? Do you feel the expansion that comes with growth? And we all want that feeling of, yes, I'm growing, I'm elevating, I'm becoming a bigger, better person. That's what we seek. That's the secret, the holy grail, the challenge we all have. And the paradox is that comes with challenge. It comes with discomfort. It comes from suffering. And why the hell would you want to put yourself into a feeling of discomfort? You know, like my son this morning, I was chatting with him. He's bruised all over, he's broken, he's sick. He's going to training 8 hours a day. And he said, the only reason why I'm appreciating all the bruises and the discomfort that I had last week is because this week it doesn't feel as bad. Like, okay. Yeah. Justification of pain and suffering. If you're not feeling pain, if you're not challenged, if you're not experiencing discomfort in whatever way, shape or form, it doesn't have to be physical abuse. It could be mental challenge, whatever it might be. You know, if you're not feeling challenged or pushed, quite simply, you aren't growing. Now, am I saying you have to feel challenge every single day in order to grow forever and ever? No, I think that would be exhausting, and some people may choose that. Good for them. I think there's a balance in this equation, and we go through cycles of challenge, cycles of reflection, cycles of comfort, cycles of challenge, cycles of reflection, cycles of comfort. It's a process. We all go through it. We must have challenge to grow. Anyway, that's my thoughts on chapter 1, understanding. Next time I will embark on chapter 2, which is the view of you. Let's talk about perspective. Okay, have a great one. See you in the next one.